there are other ROI measures, the profitability index, where you take the present value of costs and you divide it by the present value of cash inflows divided by the present value of cost outflows is another method that's used. Generally speaking, the methods we've talked about are the ones that we're going to focus on in this course. The capital budgeting not-for-profit businesses is typically done exactly the same way as it is in for-profit businesses. As I said earlier, I've never seen the net present value, social value model used, but I have seen many times used the project scoring approach. Essentially, all we do there is create a matrix, and there could be various criteria, like does it help the organization achieve its strategic mission? Does it go into new markets? Will it help us attract physicians, and so on? And then essentially the participants in the capital budgeting process make judgments about each of those criteria. And then the post-audit is a formal process after capital budgeting exercise is over that helps management to improve forecasts and so on. Like, where did we go wrong? I would like to propose that the state of North Carolina needs to do a post-audit on the Medicaid computer program, NC Tracks. $480 million is a lot of money, and it would be interesting to know whether they compare it to what the forecast was. In the real world, multiple criteria will be used. Almost always ROI is used, at least if a CFO is involved in the decision. The ROI will be the dominant metric used, but there will always be qualitative factors. Give me some examples of qualitative factors that you can think of.
Like the strategic one you talked about. Those aren't necessarily
Mm-hmm.
or the ways that they're fulfilling their mission, like serving more children or low income people.
Right, so getting at projects that help the organization achieve its mission. I mean, that's a qualitative factor. There's no metric that you can assign to that typically. Helping attract and retain physicians. Helping develop and retain new market share. Again, these are qualitative things that may or may not have financial impacts, but they're typically as important as financial. And then I guess my bottom line advice is be skeptical of highly profitable projects. I mean, this is just the Bernie Madoff rule. If something looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And you as managers will be, one of your responsibilities as managers is to be skeptical of highly profitable projects and anything that looks like that might be biased in one way or another. Finally, abandonment. What is abandonment? Well, you can abandon some kinds of projects. If you have a medical office building and it's not working out, you can sell it and to another party. Or you can just get rid of it because change it into some other use, for example. So abandonment is important because different kinds of projects may have different net present values depending on when you abandon it. So for example, consider this project. We've got a 3-year life. If we abandon it after year 1, then we'll have the value of the building would be $3,100, or the machinery. If we abandon it after year 2, the machinery would be worth $2,000. If we abandon it after year 3, it would be worth nothing. So if we abandon it after year 2, what cash flows will we have? What will the year 0 cash flow be? Well, we're spending $5,000, so that would be the year 0 cash flow. The year 1 cash flow is $2,100. What would the year 2 cash flow be? So we can abandon it for $2,000 at the end of year 2. That would be cash inflow. We could sell the machine. So what would the year 2 cash flow be? $4,000. So if we abandon after year 2, the cash flows would be negative $5,000 plus $2,100 and plus $4,000. Does everyone see how that arithmetic comes about? Here's another example. So if we don't abandon, here are the cash flows. They'll be just the ones that are set out in the first column. If we abandon 2 years, we'll have negative $5,000 in the first year, 2.1 second, and then the 2 plus the 2 in the second year. If we abandon in 1 year, we'll have the $5,000 cash outflow, and we'll have the 5.2, which is the 2.1 plus the 3.1 in year 1. So we do the net present value in all those three. What do we see? What's the optimal management strategy here? Yeah, you abandon after 2 years. So this just shows you that it's not always clear at what point an optimal life of a project could be. In fact, in this case, the project's acceptable only if it's operated 2 years. The engineering life does not always equal its economic life. There are some hostels with beds in them that are 30 years old. They're still working from an engineering point of view. The ability to abandon project may make an otherwise unattractive project acceptable. In other words, it gives you some flexibility and the ability to get rid of the project if you need to.
Where do the abandonment values come from?
I just made them up. But what do you mean you can estimate them? I mean, if you have a medical office building today, you pay $10 million for it, and 3 years from now you don't think it's working out, you know you can estimate, you could probably sell it for $10.1, $10.2 million. That would be the abandonment value.
How is it different from like a salvage value or something like that?
It's not different. It's what you could sell the asset for on the market at a particular point in time.
Does it take into account like the salaries and the costs and that sort of stuff that you were projecting in the cost for the project as well?
No, we're talking about a physical asset. We're talking about a piece of equipment or a piece of land or a building.
So in the abandonment value, you don't build anything else into that?
No, because in this case, at the end of 2 years, you pull your staff out of the building, your costs ends, your revenues end, and you get $2,000 for the piece of equipment. Okay, those are the content I wanted to cover. Let's just talk about these practice problems for a second. Capital budgeting decisions should depend solely on forecasted cash flows. Is that true or false? That's true. Which of the following statements is correct? We have normal cash flows, so the first cash flow is a negative, and the rest are cash inflows. That's the right answer. And then finally, is that true or false? This is a tricky question. Anyone want to hazard a guess? And tell me, you're right, and tell me more about the reinvestment opportunity.
Just somewhere in the book, it says something about like if they're mutually exclusive, then you have to carry out the IRR up to that point. So if one of them ended in year 5, you carry out to year 10 of the interval was. And because of that, you don't necessarily pick the one with the original greater IRR.
Right, so that's a complicated illustration of the fact that both of these projects, it doesn't take, this basic argument doesn't take into account the size of an NPV, the magnitude of the amount. So one project can have a higher IRR than the other, but the one that's the one with the lower IRR could have an enormous NPV. You see what I mean? So if I give you a choice between two projects, one $1 and you get $1.20 back, and on the other one you get $1.10 back, okay, you got an enormous internal rate of return. But if I give you a choice between two projects where you get $1 million back and $1,010,000 back, there's a lower internal rate of return, but there's a lot of value. There's a larger absolute dollar amount. So that's all we're saying is the internal rate of return ignores the magnitude of the money that's involved. $1.10 on a dollar investment has a 10% internal rate of return. $1.1 million over $1 million investment also has a 10% internal rate of return.
And some things also argue that because project Y may be more beneficial in a non-financial way,
Yeah.
that you might want to choose even though IRR as well.
Yeah, I mean that's always true throughout this entire course and the last year course. Qualitative criteria in some circumstances, will always dominate financial criteria. Okay, let's try a problem. Well, actually, let's look at the model first. So there's quite a comprehensive chapter model with this on capital budgeting. Oh, it's slow. So there's an incredibly complicated model to calculate payback using true-false statements. I think it's easier just to eyeball it personally, but you're welcome to use this model if you like. There's a good discussion of net present value, and there are two ways, you'll notice in the model, there are two ways of calculating net present value. One is to use the NPV formula, which is in this cell right here, and the other is simply to sum the cumulative cash flow. So what we're doing here is simply discounting each cash flow individually and then adding them up. Or you can use the NPV formula, which is a lot simpler in my view, but you're welcome to do it either way. The internal rate of return, again, it shows you how to do it. And the multiple internal rate of return, this is interesting. One of the another disadvantages of the IRR formula, which I didn't mention, is that you can have multiple IRRs with multiple sign changes. So for example, here we've got -6, 1.6, +10, -10. If you use the IRR formula, there's actually two internal rates of return on that cash flow, 25% and 400%. In fact, as many different times the cash flow sign changes, that's how many IRRs. So if you have minus 1.6, 10, -10, -1.6, +10, you have 5 sign changes, there'll be 5 internal rates of return. Again, the modified internal rate of return avoids that problem.
How would you know to guess 10% versus 300%? How much does that guess affect your response?
Well, I guess I'm trying to tell you is that this is an invalid analysis because the IR cannot be used when you've got multiple sign changes. And then finally, there's some interesting applications, and then there's the modified internal rate of return as well. That shows you how it can be used. And then it goes through all the example that's used in the book, and you can play around with these in terms of seeing what the differences, what the impact of different inflation rates and so on make on all the cash flow estimates. And when you do your problems, I recommend that you link these things, that you, when you're inflating the revenues, for example, you take the cash flow here and you multiply it times 1 plus the inflation rate here. And so then you just copy it over so that if you change this number here, it automatically changes all the numbers. So you want to link them to the extent you can. So that's the model. I think it's a pretty good model. So let's try an in-class, simple in-class example. Take a crack at this one. What's the payback, the IRR, and the MIR, and the NPV? Good, does someone have a payback period? How many years does it take this project to pay back? 2.6 years. IRR? MIRR? And NPV? That's it. Those are all the correct answers. Okay, again, what I typically do to calculate payback is just calculate a cumulative cash flow, which is simply the sums as you go down this column. You can tell that the sometime between year 2 and year 3, the project turns positive. So if you assume the cash flows happen equally throughout the year, it happens, the third year it's going to be 500,000, so 300 divided by 500 is 0.6. And again, to see the IRR, the MIR, and the MPV, you simply use the Excel formula as we talked about before. Okay, are there any questions about the content of capital budgeting now? Okay, now, all throughout this term, on every class we have where there's a different topic, I'm going to give you 3 quick examples of where practice varies from theory. And these are examples that I've learned sometimes painfully, but occasionally in a meaningful way. So the first example happened to be the second day of my MHA fellowship. It was a busy day. So the CEO was my preceptor, said, I want you to go up to the NICU and talk to the clinical chief. They need some new monitors for the neonatal intensive care unit. So I said, great. So I went up to I made a point to see the chief of the NICU. And this guy was a neonatologist, maybe 31, 32. He held some record that he was the youngest person ever to pass the boards in neonatology. He was from Columbia or NYU, I can't remember. And how can I put it politely? Lack of self-esteem was not a problem for him. So I go up to him and talk to this guy. I said, I'm here because the CEO said you need some new monitors. And he looked at me like I was very mysteriously, well, what can you do? How will you help me? So I said, well, I'll do a capital budgeting analysis. I'll find out, tell me the monitors that you're thinking about doing. I'll find out what their capital costs are. I'll estimate their economic lives. I'll look at the nursing differences in labor for using each one. I'll look at the maintenance, the frequency of repair, what the residual value is. Now, I'll take all those cash flows, I'll discount them, I'll calculate the present value of cost, and then I'll tell you which one is the lowest present value of cost. And he looked at me like I was talking another language. And so he had his arms crossed like this. He looked at me and smiled and said, I have another idea. And then right in front of me, literally picked up the phone some medical supply company in Indianapolis, and orders the monitors he wants right on the phone. Puts the phone down. So I got to, nice talking to you, and we went to the CEO and looked for another project. So what I learned from that was that physicians have got different capital budgeting processes than managers. Typically, physicians who bring in a lot of money to the hospital will be higher on the pecking order than physicians like infectious diseases, pediatric psychiatry, who don't bring in a lot of money in the organization. So medical politics has a very real role in capital budgeting. The second example was another hospital I worked at. What you'll find out throughout this term is that I've created havoc everywhere, many different places. The second hospital I worked at, the CEO said, we want to replace all the conventional diagnostic radiology equipment. It's all starting to get old, there's 25 machines. We're going to do it all at once. So the management project was so big that it needed the equivalent of a CON application. So I put all that together, I mailed it to the government, and I waited. A month goes by. Yeah, we received your package. Only 2 months later. Yeah, we sent it to the committee. 3 months go by. Well, we're doing some extra analysis. 4 months go by. And this goes on 5, 6 months into the process. I understand I'm getting more and more frustrated waiting to hear from back from the government. Then one Saturday evening, again, the person who would be the analog to the Secretary of Health and Human Services shows up in our ER, complaining of upper respiratory distress. The attending orders a chest x-ray. The secretary gets on the table, and while the secretary's on the table, the machine breaks down. 6-7 days later, we had the letter approving our capital expenditure, the radiology equipment. So what I learned from that lesson is that politics, government politics and so on, also play a big role in capital budgeting decisions. I mean, there was, I think it was can't remember which hospital in North Carolina last year decided to announce it wanted a PET scanner, and a competitor went to court and went to the CUN approval, the agency, and it's fighting. They don't want the competitor to get the PET scanner because it will cut into the market. So politics also plays a fairly large part in capital budgeting. The third example is yet another hospital I was at where I had sterile supply reporting. The folks that use autoclaves and gas sterilizers to clean the sterilized operating room equipment and so on. So we go through our annual capital budgeting process. I call in the head of sterile supply, who's a nurse, and we go through all her lists. We have 2 more autoclaves, another gas sterilizer, some parts, and then we get to this item. The staff room wants new furniture. Because in this hospital, the sterile supply, they're all gowned and they're sterile, so they had a staff room where they could eat their lunch and so on, that's right within the department, so they didn't have to regown and all that whenever they wanted to have a bite to eat. So there's a staff lounge right in the department. So we put it on the list. I take the list of senior management, go down the list, everything gets, and we come to the furniture and they say no. They say maybe next time, we haven't got the money to do that now. So I call in the head of sterile supply and say, well, good news, better, wait, but we're going to have to wait for the staff equipment. So she looked disappointed. She went away. Next month, about 3 or 4 weeks later, I'm walking past the department, and the staff room for sterile supply has a big window in it to make it less claustrophobic, because when you're in gowns and in a 4-room with no windows, so they can look out into the hospital hall. So I'm going past this window, and I notice there's a new chair in the staff lounge. I wonder where that came from. Anyway, I forgot about it. Another 3 or 4 weeks go by, and I could look in the window, and there's a new sofa. I said, well, where did that come from? So it turns out that in this hospital, every different level of management, like you will have, has different levels of capital authority. So I could spend in my position at the time, I could spend up to $10,000 without going to a VP to ask permission. Her level was $1,000. So what was she doing? She was replacing the furniture in the lounge one piece at a time because she didn't like senior management's decision. So she got around the capital budgeting process by using her own creativity in terms of how to use capital. So what did I learn from that? That's just one of many examples I could give you of how human beings can be very creative in getting around processes. And that's just one simple example of that. So those are 3 examples of why what you just read in the capital budgeting chapter and what happens in the real world may be different. Let's take a break.